So let's get started. Hello and welcome to This is Recruiting, a webinar series by HackerEarth. If you're with us for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we have created to address the problems of our recruiter community. And we bring in the best experts from across different fields of recruiting as well as engineering management to come in and tell us about their insights and their tips that they have. So today's webinar is very special for a couple of different reasons. One, mainly because today we have a very special guest. We have our own CTO, Vishwastam Shukla, who's here joining us today. Now, the reason we asked Vishi to join us for this webinar is because we've been receiving a lot of questions about one specific area in technical hiring and assessments. And that is creating real-world problems for tech hiring assessments and interviews. So we've been getting a lot of requests on how do you manage these problems, how do you understand which kind of problems to take up, and how do you include them in your assessment process. Now, given the fact that we've done this for a while, 10 years in fact, we thought it best to get Vishi on board today. So welcome, Vishi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for the introduction.
So Vishi has a lot of experience in this field. He's been an engineering manager before, so he's well aware of the whole technical hiring process today. And I'm sure he'll be here to answer all your questions. Just to give you a few housekeeping rules for the webinar. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the question panel on our Zoom box right at the top there. And we will address it either at the end of the webinar or during any of the questions that we have. So with that, I will let Vishi take it away. Vishi, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself before we get started on the topic?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for joining this call. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm not really sure where all you've joined from, but greetings to all of you. Quick introduction. So I've been with HackerEarth for about 4 years now. Been in this space of technical assessments for that much time. I've spent about 7 years working for Amazon, both out of India and US, specifically, in the Bay Area. And I do have about 8 years of experience in different startups, leading their engineering teams, again, in India and US. So that's been my experience so far. What I'll try to do today is maybe, just give an overview of how things look like from our vantage point, how we see things shaping up in the tech hiring space. And more importantly, how do we distinguish, like Rebecca said, between, hiring for real world skills, quote unquote, real world skills versus something which is probably considered a little bit more academic. So that will be the topic. More than happy to take any questions that you guys might have towards the end. That's a little bit about myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Vishi. So let's get started. And since we're talking about real-world assessment problems, let's first discuss why exactly should recruiters include real-world assessments, real-world problems in their assessments? And what kind of tech profiles do you think benefit from them?
Yeah. So, to start off, I wanted to actually just set the context a little bit. So when we talk about real world, what we exactly mean is technical skills which developers end up using on a day-to-day basis during their job, right? So that's what we mean by a real world here. And these could be technical skills like, can you review code? Can you write code to build an application and things like that, right? So there are two types of skills that we've seen our customers and typically in the industry, in my experience, that we assess, tech talent for. One set of skills kind of fall into the bucket of technical aptitude, while the other set of skills obviously are the core technical skills. So traditionally, hiring software developers has mostly been about their technical aptitude, right? And by that, what I mean is testing on things like data structures, algorithms, maybe a bit of SQL and things like that, right? These are very formative skills, as most of you would know. But going deep into these while you're trying to interview or assess a candidate, as of today, that is considered a bit more academic, like you said, right? So today, hiring managers actually want developers with shorter learning curves, right? Someone who can hit the ground running, maybe the specific skill set that is required for the role, right? Now, this doesn't mean that we don't test developers for aptitude, right? We do. And having great technical aptitude actually means that candidates can pick up new skills faster than the rest, right? But it is equally important for us to test them for real world skills. For instance, can they write small code blocks and convert them into a mini project, for instance, right? Or can a developer take that project and sort of bake it into a full-blown application, right? Does the developer understand what it takes to make things run on actual server infrastructure, right? I think all of these questions are kind of coming up increasingly in our conversations with our discerning customers, right? And I'm sure more will follow suit here. So that's my initial take on sort of what is real world versus the technical aptitude side of things, and why recruiters should look for this. Regarding the other question, Rebecca, that you had, right? What kind of roles is this type of assessment needed? I would actually personally suggest using this across the board, right?
Okay.
Now, the degree to which you kind of mix and match technical aptitude with technical skills could vary. And that may be a function of what you want to hire for, what is the role, what is the organization going to do with the candidate, and so on, right? But there has to be some mix of both of these, is what I'd say.
Got it. And in your experience, what kind of roles have you seen using this a lot more? Like where the aptitude is lower, but the real world skills are higher. Like, for example, say like an ML engineer or something, would that be more real world than aptitude?
Right. So of course there is skill set which is very, very specific to certain job categories. Like you said, it could be ML engineers or data scientists. It could be something like DevOps engineers, right? It could be something like test automation engineers, right? So there are these specific job families which require you to have prior knowledge of a certain specific set of technical skills.
Got it. So while we're talking about, real world problems versus like a lot of other problems, I know that there are different types of questions that we've seen, right? We've seen project type questions, we've seen full stack questions, and there are just so many. And I think it's easy to get bogged down with the technicalities behind it. So can you give us your insights and like to our recruiter audience, how do they better understand what kind of questions are there and how do they know who they're testing with these type of questions? Like who would require which type?
Yep. So, when you, let's take this in a very, very first principles manner, right? When you're hiring a software developer, right? What is the simplest question that you can ask a developer while trying to assess them, right? The simplest thing to do would be, hey, can you write a piece of code? Right? Exactly. It could be something as simple as 8 to 10 lines of code, right? And maybe we can take an example. Let's say a lot of people might ask, hey, can you sort this given list of items? Right. That is a very classical sorting problem, and it's a traditional programming question that a lot of companies would probably ask as even a warm-up question, right? This tests a little bit of your algorithmic knowledge and sort of falls into the technical aptitude bucket, right? But what if you want to see if they can build a more functional, more meaningful sort of a construct with the code that they are writing, right? So in that case, maybe you can ask them to create a mini project, right? Something which maybe has a few, instead of few lines of code, it can have few files of code working together, right? And maybe that solves a slightly bigger problem. Now, taking the earlier example of sorting a list, maybe you can convert that into another problem statement saying that, hey, can you write a program which helps me create a to-do list for my day jobs, right? For daily chores, right? Now, that's a real world sort of a problem that you can solve by writing code, right? It has more value, obviously. it needs more code to be written and probably multiple files of code talking to each other. Right? Now, that's one way we convert a classical algorithm problem into a real world problem. Now, this still tests the candidate on their coding skills, but it also forces them to think more real world use cases, right? Rather than something academic, like I said. Now, this is where you would typically use what we call as the project type problems, right? So that's the second type of problems that, recruiters here could use, or, we've seen people using, right? Now, assume you want to go further, right? Assume you want to build, you want them to build a simple user interface for this to-do list application, right? Let's say you want to have this application done on a browser, right? Something that other users can also use over a browser. In that case, the candidate should know how to integrate their code with maybe a simple database, right? Or how to run that code in a server environment. How to spin up a simple user interface and sort of tie all of these things together, right? You have a backend, you have a front end, you have a database, and all those things, right? This is where you would typically use what we call as the full stack problem, right? So that's the major difference. So you start with like a vanilla programming question, move to a project type question, and then move to a full stack. And vanilla programming questions, you can consider that as a few lines of code kind of a problem. A full stack problem is a full blown application that you may ask a candidate to develop.
Got it. So with these vanilla type questions, or the basic questions, those are mostly addressed to, say, front end developers or just normal software developers, but rather the other ones you'd say are more, deeper in the seniority and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, correct. So typically, depending on the experience level, depending on what is the skill set that you require, some companies may want, to hire developers who already have, full stack skills, application development skills, while others might be okay to hire somebody who's just great on technical aptitude and somebody who can come and pick up the chops as they go along, right? So,
right. And when we're doing, like, say, if we're giving them problems, say in the assessment stage, right, we technically give them like a lot more time to figure out these things. So what about in an interview, when you have to interview a candidate in real time and they have to come up with solutions on the fly? What do you think are questions there that would help assess better, given that you have like a shorter period of time as well, right?
Right. Yeah. So there are two ways you can go about that. Typically, what we've seen in the industry, and again, talking from my experience, one way, and this is probably one of the better ways to do this, is you sort of do a tech assessment, which can be like an offline activity, which a candidate does prior to the actual interview, right? And in that case, you can ask the candidate to build an application, let's say attempt a full stack question. Now, when you're going in for the interview, both you and the candidate has the context of that particular application which was developed as part of the assessment. You could actually take that as the context for your interview and actually dig deeper, right? So that is one way which I prefer doing a lot of my interviews, right? So give them an assessment beforehand, let them attempt it, let them get evaluated on that. And then basis on their scores, let's say if they get shortlisted for interviews, then you sort of ask them deeper questions around how they went about creating that application. So that's one way. The other way, if let's say you don't have the liberty of giving them a prior assessment and you just straight off jump into an interview setting, in that case, what I would say is the definition of real world technical skill kind of changes a little bit, because in that case, I may not prefer asking let's say somebody who's 3 to 5 years experience or 7-8 years experience to write, let's say, a pure algorithmic code, right? Instead, what I would basically tell them is that, hey, I have this application in mind, and why don't you go ahead and code out just a small feature of that application, right? On the code editor, which probably shared, let's say, right? So then you give them the entire context of the application, maybe have them design a few things about that application, and then have them write out that small piece of code for a limited functionality.
Got it. And building off of this question and the different question types itself, right? Let's talk about some more use cases, because I think that is something that would really help the community, right? If they can put into practice, or they know exactly what they're looking for in different question types. So we discussed programming, we discussed real world and full stack and project type. But when it comes to, say, like in an actual interview or an actual assessment that's happening, in your experience, what are some of the use cases you've seen?
Right. I think, if our audience has, mostly experienced recruiters, I think one thing that they would agree with me on is that a lot of times there is difficulty when it comes to having a handshake with the hiring manager and understanding what their real needs are. Right. So as a hiring manager, a person might go to the recruiting team and tell them that, hey, I want to hire a Python developer. Right? And maybe 3 to 5 years experience, whatever, right? Now that might sound to be like a specific job role in hiring manager's mind, but for a recruiter to actually zero in on what exactly is required, that translation can be tough at times, and things can get lost in translation, right? As we know. So let's take that example and sort of try to build on that, right? So let's say you want to hire a Python developer, right? And, there can be varying level of expertise that hiring managers might be looking for from this role, right? From a fresher to somebody who has several years of working experience with the language or with the specific stack, right? So if you remember the last thing that I was talking about, let's say sorting a list is a problem statement, right? You could do that in Python as well, right? So you could ask the candidate, hey, can you write a program which sorts a list in Python? And that is one way to test, Python ability for a candidate, right? It would give you a basic Python skill evaluation along with some sort of an aptitude signal as well. And that would be your traditional programming question, right? And this is typically well suited for, fresher candidates, right? Somebody who's fresh out of college. But say you want to, hire somebody who knows a bit more about Python and maybe its libraries, right? Someone who can play around with multiple data structures, can create different classes and other abstractions. This is where, again, you might use the project type problem, right? And I would typically expect somebody with maybe about 1 to 2 years experience to be able to complete this task with ease, right? Take up a project type problem in Python. And of course, now the difficulty level of the problem, etc., can be decided basically benchmarks that different teams and organizations have, right? Now that's the second leg. Now, if you want someone who can again create full-blown Python applications from day one, now this is not limited to knowledge of Python and its libraries, but also use of its frameworks, something like Django maybe, right? Setting up a server environment in Python's case could be GUnicorn or whatever. Deploying that application, debugging that application, or even monitoring that application, right? This is end-to-end, right? This is where you use the full stack type of problem to assess their all-round capabilities, right? And this is typically very useful for hiring mid to senior level lateral hires, right? Somebody who has been in the industry and has built things previously, knows his or her way around various technologies, right? Now, this is the 3 types that we talked about. But guess what? There's more that you can do with Python, right? And that is why, I sometimes empathize with the recruiting partners that we have, because you can do so much with just one skill set that you're looking for. How about, let's say you want to hire machine learning engineers, right? In that case, none of this, what I talked about, would probably work, right? In that case, you would want to test the candidate not just for their vanilla Python knowledge, but also their ability to create machine learning models, right? And using Python libraries like NumPy or TensorFlow, whatever, right? And in such cases, you would want to use a completely different question type for your assessment, something like machine learning questions or even data science questions for that matter, right? So you would want to see whether the candidate can quickly spin up some models or test out existing models on something like a Jupyter Notebook interface, right? And again, a Python developer, but cut out for a very, very different role, you see, right? So having this sort of a holistic toolkit at your disposal to assess precisely, right, for the role that you're hiring for, I think that can go a long way. And it also kind of enables the conversation, to be a very high quality conversation, and the handshake to be, very easy. Talking about the handshake between the hiring manager and the recruiters.
Yeah. And I'm sure, we've seen a lot of different cases here working with customers who use these different types of questions and stuff. Do you have any, interesting tidbit there? Have you seen like different question types that are used with one of our customers where they've come back with very positive reviews on how it's been used and how they carried out the entire process? Because I think we've learned a lot based on what they've been giving us, right? The feedback.
Yep. So I think, I'm not sure if I can name customers here, but different customer profiles, right? So for instance, one of our big customers is, let's say, one of the top IT services companies in the world, right? They come to us with very different profiles that they want to assess for, right? One set of profiles is more like, hiring fresh graduates, hiring somebody with 1 or 2 years of experience. And that's where they're focusing more on the technical aptitude side. And the reason for that is that they have a 6 months boot camp that is already planned out for all these candidates who would be hired through this route, right? So that's one profile. The second profile that they hire for is more for, deploying into running projects, right? Hiring engineers who can be deployed from day zero, right? And that is where they're looking for very specific skill set. Let's say if they're hiring Java developers, they would say, hey, I need somebody who knows Spring Boot, right? Or if they're hiring .NET, then they would say, I need somebody who knows C# and .NET and can start writing code, production quality code from day one, right? So that's, just one customer having multiple profiles of candidates hiring through different problem types. Right. We recently had a very interesting use case where one customer is basically developing their own language. Right now, they have their own language and they have their own sort of frameworks available. And I think what they wanted to do was not just hire, but also evangelize their technology. Now that was very interesting because a lot of people do come to us for evangelizing the technologies that they're working on. Right. So they came to us, they said, hey, looks like you have a, big community. Can we evangelize and also try to hire? And we set things up for them. Imagine, running a completely new language, completely new framework on our infrastructure for the first time ever, and having thousands and thousands of engineers and developers participate in that. I think that adds just so much more value beyond hiring, right? So I think there are a whole lot of use cases where we've seen, customers hiring for varying needs using different prompt types.
That's nice to know. It's nice to hear, what kind of things we've also done in the past. There's always an interesting story there. And I'm sure you ask different teams, they have different perspectives on the same thing as well. We've been discussing a lot of question types right now, and there are obvious perks of having like a very diverse question library, the ability to craft more holistic assessments and ensure skill-based hiring and everything. But apart from that, what are metrics that recruiters should be aware of while choosing a good assessment platform?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I'm sure a lot of our members from the audience are already using something or the other. Some of you, I'm told, are already using our platform. Some of you might be using some other platforms. But I think having the ability, to test candidates and assess them for precise skills is important. And that is something which you get via the bouquet of question types that I just talked about, right? So that is anyway, very, very important. But I think there are a few other things that probably are very necessary. If I had to list out some of them, one of them would be, as recruiters, let's say, right? Do you have the capability to benchmark the candidates in your own pool, right? So let's say you have to hire, 5 developers or 10 developers. Say your conversion ratio is 10 to 1. which means you would have assessed 100 candidates to hire 10, right? Now, if you have 100 candidates for a role, can you objectively identify who performed better than the rest? And I think that kind of benchmarking, not just at an overall assessment level, but also at a skill level. So let's say you give them an assessment which tests them for 3 or 4 different skills. Then how do you compare, right? How do you objectively compare candidates and benchmark them within your own pool? And I think that's really important, because that gives you solid data to have a conversation with the hiring managers and with the team leads and engineering leaders, saying that, hey, this is how my talent pool is actually performing. And they can probably give some feedback on, okay, this is how you go about sourcing your pool. Maybe these are things that are working out well. These are things which are not working out well with the sourcing part, right? So that's one interesting, aspect about the whole hiring thing. Of course, I'm not going to talk about, looking at metrics like time to hire and all. I'm sure a lot of, recruiters who use our platform or probably use something else already know those metrics. But this benchmarking is definitely one of the data points that I would definitely want our partners to be able to actually explore. Now, the other thing, maybe one of the things that at least I have seen, and more so on my LinkedIn timeline, right? If you see any hiring manager or any recruiter, all of them are hiring rock stars, right? No matter where you work, what team you're hiring for, everybody's hiring rock stars, right? Of course, everyone has a different definition of that, right? But what if there's a way to actually globally benchmark your talent, right, across industry peers? So initially, I was talking about benchmarking within your own pool. Now what I'm saying is, hey, if I'm an Amazon, can I benchmark my talent, let's say with Google? Or if I'm a Walmart, can I benchmark my talent with Uber or Facebook or whatever else, right? Now, how do you go about doing that? I think if you have, objective benchmarks, versus some of the other organizations who might be hiring for, similar positions, and they are similarly positioned in the industry themselves, I think that kind of analytical data set can help you take much better strategic decisions regarding your hiring approach. So again, having the right data, on your fingertips, on your tools, on your assessment platforms really goes a long way, I'd say. So that's the second, thing that probably is a differentiator when it comes to choosing between or picking between assessment platforms, I'd say. What else? I think another initiative that we've started hearing a lot these days is something called blind hiring, right? This is definitely gathering pace. You could call it DNI, right? This is where, but blind hiring is more specifically about, you don't even look at candidates' personal information, right? No resume, no gender, no ethnicity, no work experience, no education background, heck, not even their names, right? What if you don't know any of this, right? And yet you want to assess the candidate, right? At least in the beginning, that's how you want to go about it, right? So I think top of the funnel, you go absolutely blind. You know nothing about the potential candidates, and you know nothing personal about them. You just roll out an assessment test, right? Now that is a hugely empowering practice, not just for the candidates, but also for the organizations which see themselves as equal opportunity employers, right? So a lot of our customers have taken this route and have, uncovered some serious talent, which would otherwise not even be on their radar, right? So you could actually build a very, very solid top of the, funnel sourcing pipeline just by going blind, right? And removing a lot of those said and unsaid, unacknowledged, unidentified biases that might just be there, right? So I think that's the third point that I wanted to actually pick up. Maybe lastly, and this is again very not necessarily related to assessment itself, but sort of tangential to that. Since you're talking to our recruiter partners, one of the things that I feel any assessment platform should help and assist our recruiting community is with sourcing as well, right?
Right.
So these two problems might be different, like assessment and sourcing, but they are still, sort of joint at the hip, right? So what if you don't even have to source the tech talent that, you're looking to build your funnel with, right? So
Right.
any assessment platform which actually comes with its own, developer community is a huge, huge plus, I'd say, right? You could not just, hire from that ready pool, but you could also build a warm pool of talent, right? Which is sort of ready to be tapped into at your own sort of convenience, right? Maybe a few clicks, right? Imagine, being able to reach out to millions of developers like that and just showcase your positions and, get them to compete for those. That is a huge, huge, I'd say it's a serious hiring muscle that you cannot ignore, right? And it will definitely help you hire better, have fast turnaround times. And I think one added advantage of doing that via the community is also that, you end up building a significant brand in the developer community as well.
Definitely, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I think those would be the top few things beyond the core assessment piece that we talked about.
Awesome. So we are going to open up for a few audience questions now. In case there are any, please do put it in the Q&A box there, or you can send us via chat. So we have one question here on take-home assessments versus on-site assessments. What, in your experience, provides for a better candidate experience? I think this is not very related to assessments, but I guess it kind of falls in the ballpark. Is the experience better if you have it in a mass hiring challenge, or is it better to do it on-site or take home? How have we dealt with it in the past?
Yeah, so I think horses for courses. I think we've had customers on both sides. Some of our customers have preferred doing on-site assessments where they call in the candidate and then give them an online link to sort of have them take the assessment, whereas others have been okay sort of doing a take-home sort of thing. I would say if I just talk about it statistically, most of it has been take-home assessments rather than on-site, and it could possibly be a function of how the world is moving more and more remote today. So it could just be a function of that. I think from a candidate experience perspective, look, any assessment, any hiring process step, whether it is an interview or an assessment, is by definition a bit of a challenge for the candidates, right? So I think if there is one moving piece that you can remove from that challenge and let them sort of take it from their home in the comfort of their work, desk that they are used to, I think that probably from a candidate experience, I think it goes a long way. And I personally prefer that over calling somebody on site and doing it. But people have their reasons. Some organizations have come to us asking for on-site assessments simply because they are sometimes worried about use of unfair means and things like that, right? And while we do have enough checks and balances in terms of proctoring through webcam and things like that, but yeah, that's probably one set of customers who choose something like an on-site assessment. But for most of them, I think take-home assessments work out better.
Yeah, especially now, in this day and age with hybrid working and, a lot of people are hiring their engineering teams remotely. They're hiring for remote engineers across the world. And I think, this proctoring and making sure that an assessment platform also has like the required security to deal with something like that is super important. I hope that answers your question to whoever asked us that. We have one more question, and I think this is okay. Let me see. Yes, thank you, Darren. With it being a candidate market right now, how do you handle situations where strong candidates don't want to spend so much time with assessments, especially when companies are trying to expedite the recruiting process, given really good candidates are off the market within a week?
Yeah, I think that's a hard problem to solve. I'd admit there is no, one-stop solution for the problem that you're, seeking an answer for. But I think one of the things that we've seen companies do is one, message it in the right manner, right? And I think that messaging goes a long way. Sometimes if the recruiting team sort of just sends out an assessment with an email and doesn't really bother following up and things like that, there is a high likelihood that the candidate might drop off, right? So if you particularly see a strong candidate in the pipeline, I would say it's worth it calling them up, following up with them a couple of times, and just doing your basic checks, dip checks with them if they are interested in the role or not, right? And then going about actually sending out the assessment, rather than sending the assessment as the very first step and just saying hello with that, right? So say your hellos first. Introduce yourself as the organization, set your pitch, because just as you are assessing the candidate is also assessing you. Maybe treat them as your customer, right? Spend that half an hour, 15-20 minutes. I personally take time out to do exploratory call with some of the senior candidates, just because I don't want them to drop off my funnel, right? So having that initial call with the hiring manager, with somebody senior in the leadership, just giving that 10-15 minutes, I think increases your chances of converting that candidate multifold.
And what about the length of the assessments itself? Like, I mean, would you, if say this was like a really good candidate, would you even forego the assessment, or maybe just give them just basic level things to check it out? Or would you still follow with like complete due diligence if there are multiple rounds or multiple technical rounds?
Yeah. So, if you are discerning enough and you want to sort of optimize for the candidate experience, I'm assuming you're not talking about assessing hundreds or thousands of candidates, right? You're talking about maybe tens of candidates, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, you may choose not to have a cookie cutter solution, right? You may choose to handhold the candidate a little bit here and there, right? Biggest of companies, right? And we work with the likes of Googles and the Amazons and the Walmarts and the Facebooks of the world. Biggest of companies have recruiters reaching out to candidates months in advance, right? Months in advance. And this is when they have such a strong brand name in the industry that candidates anyway line up for them, right? So if you're talking about the fan club, there's a huge list of candidates who are anyway lined up to give those interviews. But I think if those companies are interested in certain candidates, then it is worthwhile to sort of customize your hiring process here and there. Maybe do your couple of interviews first and then go for tech assessment when they are slightly deeper into the pipe. Maybe you could do your culture fit test first. Maybe you could do your other rounds first and then go for specific skill set assessment. So I think that kind of customization flexibility has to be there, specifically for candidates who just look really good and stand out anyway through their profiles.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Switching up the rounds also a little bit, so they also feel like, okay, they've passed a few more rounds before getting there and more invested in the entire process.
Yeah. So for instance, when I do, interviews for some of the senior guys, we don't necessarily ask them to, if you're talking about somebody with 10 to 15 years of experience, we don't necessarily ask them to take a technical assessment in most cases, let's say specifically for a, people management role. But we do ask them to do, let's say, a written assignment, right? Or maybe a design assignment. It's similar to, it's very akin to, giving a tech assessment as well, right? And in that case, I do it typically after the second or third interview is done, right? Because they, at that point, are personally invested in the process. They have some skin in the game. And I think that is probably a sweet spot where you could try things out.
Right. I hope that answers your question, Darren. Thank you. If there are any other questions, please put it in our question and answer box there and we'll get to it. I think we're mostly done. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for attending. If you have any other questions, please feel free to mail us at, you can mail me at rebecca@hackerearth.com, and you can connect with Vishy on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions, he'd be happy to answer there. Be sure to check out our resources pages because we have so many more interesting and fun resources on technical hiring and the stuff we've done so far, the problems we've faced, and unique solutions that we've also come up with. So thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you so much, Vishi, for taking this time out to do this entire webinar with us. We heard some really great information from you, a lot of super helpful assessment insights, and I hope there are a lot of takeaways. In case you liked our webinar, please drop us a message and let us know if there are any topics you'd like to see in the future, if there are any other problems that you've come across. We'll be happy to address them. On that note, thank you to everyone. Have a great rest of the week. And to everyone who's going to bed right now, good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone.